and we're live on Facebook. Uh, Good afternoon and welcome to another webinar by the Destination Knowledge Center. Uh, my name is Kuntil Barwa. Today's webinar is from our series Food Stories of India, and today we are going to talk about Bengal, food from Bengal. Uh, Food and Bengal share a deep connection from the delicious fish, sweets, biryanis, and street food to the lesser known delicacies. Bengal is a foodie's paradise. Here you can find elements and influences from different ethnicities and culture all blending together to give rise to some of the most unforgettable culinary experiences. To tell us more, we have with us Purna Banerjee. Purna is a food and travel writer, restaurant consultant, and social media strategist based in Kolkata. She is deeply interested in the culinary history and has been blogging for over 10 years about food and travel based on her extensive explorations across the world. Welcome, Purna, and over to you for the food stories from Bengal. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I am so excited to be here and talking about one of my favorite topics, which is food history. And also, because I'm a very proud Bengali, I feel that Bengal is one of those states of India which has not had its full plethora of history. Uh, Completely explored. So, Bengal for me is a place which is, of course, at a juncture which provides me the best of the world. From the east to the west, from the north to the south, I do feel that Bengal has been able to take something from a lot of different races as well as communities, and it has come up with something which is absolutely unique and interesting. So while I would say that Bengal does have a lot of uh, inspirations as well as additions from multiple parts of the world, I would also say that it does have its own unique plethora of items that we personally feel is definitely extremely conducive to the uh, weather as well as the location. So without further ado, I'm going to just start talking about the little stories that I can tell you from this particular community. The first thing that I would like to do is I'm going to show you guys the PowerPoint slideshow I've presented today. And this one, we are going to just talk about a little about the food of Bengal and where it has started to originate in. So as you may understand, although we are going to talk today about West Bengal and different parts of West Bengal, this is
Purna, maybe we can
essentially,
go full screen.
yeah, just 1 second.
Yeah.
Uh, Although we are going to talk about, 1 second, yeah, although we are going to talk about West Bengal in general, I'm going to specifically focus on the culinary plethora that has originated in what was known as Bengal at one point of time, which today does contain a huge part of Bangladesh and a little bit of Assam and a little bit of Bihar and Jharkhand. And also, we are going to talk a little bit about the history of Bengal itself, because that's the original story. So, Bengal is a place which has been referred to by multiple authors for a very long time. One of the most significant references of Bengal is by Ptolemy, who was uh, a person who was advising Alexander at one point of time. And of course, he was someone who did have his start in the courts of Alexander, but at one point of time, his family and himself became the rulers of Egypt thanks to the invasion. So Ptolemy talked about the Gangaderai, who were uh, apparently from the Gangetic Delta, and that sort of distinctly refers to a fierce race of people who were situated around this region and also in parts of Bihar, if I'm not mistaken, and they were fierce warriors who were very great at resisting foreign invasion. So that's the first reference we get of Bengal, and of course there are references that we get of the ancient port of Bengal, Tomluk or Tamrolipto, which is definitely mentioned in Fahian's work as well as Huan Sang's work. And both Huan Sang and Fahian were great Buddhist uh, travelers who were chronicling the history of the world during their travels. And that is also the reason why Bengal does feature in those ancient writings. So, what they kind of talked about was the advent of certain races. Of course, Bengal was ruled for a time by the Hindu rulers, and they were definitely ruled by the Buddhist rulers. The Shen, the Pal, there were definitely definite rulers. The Dharmapal rulers were Buddhist rulers, and then we do suffer from what is known as a little bit of a gap, and that gap is again recovered from during the 9th and 10th century, and we see that the by this point of time the Muslim invasion, or rather the Abyssinian invasion, had started, and the next significant ruler, I would say, from Bengal is this guy called Shoshanko, who was also someone uh, sort of situated somewhere um, in parts of uh, parts of I studied in history as the medieval history. One of the Ten Shah. And so back, I'm going to stop the presentation but send this out my okay, so the Bengal had an image of what and Russia, rice, and one thing I with say all through we eat seasonal vegetables. There are little so naturally something that has been raised to eat. So you are already so I would say for a Bengali, lunch is possibly the most significant meal of the day. Breakfast is often a, a very quick affair, and dinner generally, from most older texts, it's said that you should have a light dinner. And for Bengalis, after lunch, you're supposed to have a little bit of a siesta, similar, very interestingly, to how the Spanish people and the Portuguese people take a siesta in the afternoon. Bengalis do, after eating lunch, take a little nap. So, in at least they used to even 50 years ago. Nowadays, thanks to the work scene, it's a different situation. But the Bengali palate has six different tastes, which is hot or spicy, then very sweet, there's salty, sour, bitter, and astringent. The last one might be slightly difficult for you to understand, but if you have had really strong tea, after you've had that strong tea, your mouth will feel like it's devoid of water. And that is what astringent is like. That's what astringent tastes like. So essentially, this is something that I feel is something really significant, and people should know that one. Now, um, here's what I feel is very important. Uh, Generally, the Bengali palate starts with something bitter because we believe that the good things will should be left for the last. So there is a saying in Bengali which says "Modhure no Shamapayet," which means that the particles of honey is how the meal should end. And so we leave the dessert for the last while we have the bitter thing, which is the most liked thing at first. So even if you eat the way Bengali people eat their food, a lot of people tend to keep the proteins for consumption right before they would have dessert, because they consider protein to be the best part of the meal. So it should be at the end of it and it should be savored. That's how they think. So the ideal way you start is you start with something bitter, like with what we call karela, or bitter gourd, or uche, which is young bitter gourd, or neem, which is the leaves of the young leaves of the neem tree. Or we also have other bitters. For example, a lot of people also use, apart from these three, these are the holy trinity of bitterness. You also have things like kalmeg, which a lot of people drink as juice right in the morning to keep your stomach clean. the idea of having something bitter is to kind of freshen up the palate, and everything else that comes after the bitter tastes extra great because you just had something which isn't your thing. So after that, you have a green vegetable, or essentially what we know is a shark. And the shark is something that's an integral part of the older Bengali plate. In fact, one of the oldest references, if I'm not mistaken, in Honor the Mongol, which is a Bengali book, there is a reference of kind of shark. And shark or greens are also constantly used in different kinds of religious ceremonies. For example, right before Kali Pujo, or the worshipping of the goddess Kali, due on the day when there is one thing called Bhut Chaturdashi, which is like the Bengali versions of the Halloween, which where it's said that the veil between the other world and this world is kind of removed. That's where you can have one of the shark, and this is essentially a melange of 14 different kinds of greens, significantly including jute leaves, then what we call brahmi leaves, then there is something called helencha or hinche, there is something called gime or gima shag, and of course there is another uh, 8 or 9 different kinds of shag, making 14 different kinds of greens in total, which you're supposed to have to cleanse yourself. The idea of eating shark is also very scientifically proved that anything like this will add blood to your system. It is going to provide you with a lot of vitamin K. It's really rich in a lot of different kinds of nutrients and minerals, and it is really fibrous, so it's really good for you. So the next thing that you will see in your Bengali plate is the lentil, and we generally have really soupy, runny dal. Uh, Preferably mung beans are always encouraged, and mung beans are one of our original beans that we have. And by the way, if you can see this one on your right, I would show you the saffron streak swala image, and this one has got a basic Bengali plate. So you can see that there is some greens here, if you notice. Then there is a dal, and you can see that the dal is quite soupy. And then there is one, this is like if I'm not mistaken, this is an aloo posto, which is something that you can have before you start with dal or afterwards. And then we have some kind of bhaja, which is a fried thing. And this is about you send it there and have the chutney. But if you are into eating non-vegetarian food, after the dal and the bhaja and the uh, torkari that you are have seeing here, you will be going to meat and by fish meat is something that we love eating. And then we have kinds of fish, and also kind of is great with rice. Other kind of things, and any part of it, we have a lot of recipes which the discard is discarded. Like you have now I see that there are sweets here, but ideally this is like a really luxurious place. Ideally, you will be able to see we have because it's also be that it's left to the end of the meal. And actually, and that can be fish or some kind of sweets, maybe pite if it is in the right season in the winter. But we are not very big fans of sweets at first, uh, until and unless it's have essentially is really simple. It's just but mostly it's just moody and grated coconut. This is the most basic breakfast you can have, and also one of the oldest known Bengali breakfasts. Apart from that, a lot of people do have this tendency of eating leftover rice from the night before, especially if they are running off to work. This is a really substantial, sustainable meal, leftovers, and of course, this is a definite Bengali luxurious breakfast, and this is the luchi, the white luchi that you eat, which is basically fried balls of maida, which is flattened, similar to a puri but much lighter, much fluffier. And with that, we generally have either dal, some sort of lentil, or we have something like an aloo, potatoes lightly sauteed, or we have something which is like a very quick fry, or we can have something as luxurious as this aloo or potato and peas dum, which is definitely I would say a little bit of a heavier breakfast, but it's definitely a great once in a while affair. Um, and apart from that, with the rice and everything, there are definitely a lot of afternoon snacks. We'll get back to the snacks part later because that's definitely got its own story. But the first part we'll talk about the cuisine and how we can see. So there are, of course, a lot of influences on Bengali food. And if you look at the Bengali palette here, which I'm providing to you, this kind of shows sort of a plethora of an assortment of different cultures coming together. First of all, if you follow the lead, you see that this is like a really cool game of identifying which part it is coming from. So first of all, the rice is definitely something that every Southeast Asian person can identify with. But with the rice, you can see the first thing. This is on top of it are these assorted fries. This one that you're seeing is a beguni or a fried brinjal, and brinjals have been around for over 4,000 years and is also noted in the Harappan civilization as per a historian friend of mine. Then you see potol or pointed gourd right below that, and this is of course something that Bengalis have an eternal love with. You see this. This is actually seed to propagate the opium trade during the British rule. Before that, poppies were not that popular in Bengal, and we were much more of uh, we eat a lot of now part of the Bengal palate was really a sort of a forced culture on us. But well, we like it, so it's okay. On the other hand, you see on this side, you do see some potatoes which are deep fried, and this is an ode to the Portuguese, who originally were the bringers of potato to this particular country. And originally, potatoes were uh, grown in and around Mumbai region of present day, i.e., Maharashtra region, which is why the first references of potatoes during the 1800s end in different cookbooks Pak Rajeshwar as well as Pragya Sundari Devi's books, you see that there are references to potatoes as Bombay potato or Mumbai potatoes, which basically shows where it is from. And the rice during that point of time in many British writing has been the Patna rice. So the rice that was grown at that point of time, which was considered to be of a higher quality, of a better quality, or quality which is fit for the British, was coming from Patna slash Bihar region. Now comes the next two things here. This is a chop and this is a cutlet. So essentially, a chop has different formats. It is typically a croquet, which is a British croquet. But I would say that the name why chop the croquet became chop here was for the um, ease of recitation, as in it is much easier to say chop than uh, saying croquet, I would have to admit. And the other thing that you would see is the cutlet, the other famous British addition to our menu. And you see that this cutlet here is something that we have uh, adapted from the British pretty adeptly, because the crumb fried cutlet is now literally a huge part of the Bengali afternoon snack culture. Then what you see is the dal, and this dal is a very old recipe. It's just what we call the washed mung beans or shona muget dal, and we they have cooked it here with peas. And this is again a recipe that's great for the winters. It's also a pretty old recipe. I have seen my grandmother, my great grandmother make this recipe. It's the same process over and over again. Right on top of it, this is something that has like a lot of disputed history, but this is known as the shukto. The shukto is essentially a very old Bengali recipe, which you would have a lot of references in popular Bengali songs or popular Bengali, adages. So one of them is that you can't have a shukto without the addition of a little bit of mustard and a little bit of milk. And it is supposed to calm your stomach down and that's why it contains, among other things, drumsticks, raw banana, and these two are uh, actually the most commonly used ingredients. And apart from that, you can use other things like uche or young bitter gourd, and of course other things as well. But typically for the shukto, it's something that apparently was taken from the Portuguese as well. This is a story that has been repeated over and over again, and said that apparently the Portuguese have a stew which is very similar to the shukto, and we kind of adapted it from them. However, its full validity is not yet confirmed. Right on top of that, you see, this is what I know that this doesn't look very much, but this is essentially what is called a dhoka. Now the dhoka per se is something that's really interesting in the sense because this is actually the Bengali version of the gatta. And if you guys know what a gatta is, it's essentially chickpeas which are first pasted and then formed into like a shape and then steamed and then chopped and fried and then put in some form of gravy. Well, the same thing happens with the dhoka. And it is definitely something that a lot of people say are similar, and we kind of like it. And here we see the three important elements. This is the aloo dum. Again, apparently a Kashmiri recipe that we've adapted. There have been a lot of differences, and beside it, we see here is this is ilish. This is the queen of Bengali fishes, as they say. And right beside that is the ubiquitous kosha mangsho. Now, these two are, of course, probably two of the most popular Bengali non-vegetarian staples that a lot of people really like. I personally feel that these two are also extremely well. They are both extremely well known, and the ilish is cooked in mustard paste. Mustard is again one of the most popular Bengali ingredient, so definitely something that we love. Now, apart from these two, for the dessert we have the chutney. This is the malpua, again another thing that we got from our UPI slash Bihari brothers and sisters, and we love it. And then we have the Roshomalai, which contains Roshogolla, and the Roshogolla that we have here in Bengal is definitely something that is quite different from the Odisha Roshogulla, which is what Odisha is known for, especially areas around Cuttack and Balasore. Definitely the which is really something we see and in quite a few meat recipes actually liu at the food part using them to point. This is a gom lebu, which is an indigenous lebu, which is lemon with India, and this is one of the things that has incredible smell and flavor, which kind of gives Bengal a lot of flavor. Now, the lebu or the lemon, the flavoring that we have, we do also have a lot of other kinds of lemon. There is also the Shatkora in the Sylhet region of Bangladesh, and there is the Kagji, which is available all through the Southeast Asia. And the most common parallel to that is definitely the kaffir lime. If you see the way the things are cooked, mustard is definitely used considerably uh, in Bengali as well as parts of Indian cooking. Mustard oil is used considerably in Nepali, Bengali, Bihari, and UPI cooking. Then a lot of these things have the way they are cooked are similar to many different countries of the world, and that's why I think that the Bengali platter is so completely unique in its inclusion of so many different kinds of food. Now, next, what we are looking at is the cuisines of different parts of Bengal. And now, not Bengal, especially Darjeeling and Kalimpong, because they were at one point of time under the British colonial rule, and the Britishers set up a lot of things there. They do have beautiful houses there, not to mention a culture which is a conglomeration of Bengali, Nepali, Tibetan, as well as British influences, and that kind of makes the cuisine there quite unique. In Darjeeling specifically, the Planters Club and the sausages available in a place called Kevinter's, right opposite Planters Club, is quite legendary, and it has been mentioned in numerous books over the years, from as early as the 1930s and 40s, if I'm not mistaken. In Bandel, where there was a strong Portuguese rule, you would find the famous Bandel cheese, which is definitely something that the Portuguese had brought, and it is smoked there as well as served fresh. The smoked cheese does have a lot more shelf life than the fresh one, and it tastes quite similar to a feta cheese. So we do use it on its own. We eat it on its own, or we can put it on salads and all. So there are a lot of restaurants in Kolkata today who are experimenting with this particular cheese, and the results are excellent. Then the Purulia region, which is the on the North Bengal side, they do have a lot of very interesting tribal cultures, and they do have a very interesting cuisine line. And apart from the food, the most popular drink in that region is called mahua, which is distilled from the tree mahua, rather flower mahua, and it is an alcoholic drink, and it does have some intoxicating effect. And with that, Purulia is also known for its tribal cuisine, which is extremely interesting in its nature. And I would have to say that, since although I know a lot about it, I would rather want someone from Purulia to talk about it, to respect their culture and understand the significance of different times better. But they do have, I have to say, on as an overview, quite a lot of different kinds of pithe or pitha, which is essentially made with rice flour and different types of ingredients that go with it. So this, by the way, this particular pithe or pitha, that for it part of the Bengali with rice flour, and it's steamed, or pitha. If it's steamed, it has a lot of for pitha, and those will be cooked with and that's incredible. Eating they're watching to eat hours much more on the sly, because the government is extremely vigilant in that region. But even 30-35 years ago, this food was scattered with a lot of different kinds of wild game animals, not to mention wild boars and wild birds. So that's definitely something that is worth exploring. And the last one that I'll be talking about is the Bengali Muslim food, which I personally feel is one of the most underrated food in Bengal. And that particular Bengali food, I would say that, you need to go back to the districts of Murshidabad, because there some of the greatest Nawabs of Bengal resided in Murshidabad. And have their own version of very interesting recipes, which I would have to admit is very difficult to find in the cities. So, for example, things like a Nargisi kofta is essentially a whole egg which is coated in meat and then deep fried and then served in a curry, which at one point of time apparently gave rise to the very famous Scotch egg, which is a British tradition. This is, of course, a rumored story, but apparently there are some connections between them, especially because the Nargisi kofta had been around for a very long time, and the colors of the yolk reminded the king of the Nargis flower, which is why the name. Um, and this is, by the way, the Bandel cheese, which you can see here. The next thing that I would talk about is the two main streams of Bengali food that is also very popularly established. Because Bengal has been constantly invaded and also partitioned, uh, uh, there was a time where Bengal had a very bloody history, where thousands and thousands of people, including my own, migrated from what is now known as Bangladesh to Kolkata. And they settled in different parts of, actually, not just Kolkata, also Bengal. And they settled in different parts of Bengal and made a life for themselves. So, to distinguish themselves from those who had taken refuge, the people who are from around here indigenously started calling themselves the Ghoti, while the ones who came from Bangladesh were calling the Bangal. So it is said that the Bangals like their spices a lot, and while the Ghotis love their sweetness. Uh, there is definitely some justification there, especially because a lot of times the food that the Bengal people would be able to afford would be very cheap and therefore not of very good quality. And the only way they would be able to digest it is if they put a lot of spices in it and hid the flavors. But of course, this does have a lot of uh, clarifications that should be made. Sometimes some people say it's just the taste, some people say it's the ingredient, and there is no one answer. So that's definitely there. One other thing that I would like to say is that the Ghotis do have uh, a monopoly over the jumbo prawns, as they say, that it's a very Ghoti thing to do. If you don't like it, you are not a Ghoti. While the Ilish is, of course, loved by the Bengalis, Bangals. And since I am allergic to both, I have no say in there. The last thing that I would like to talk about uh, is the sweet part, and this is, by the way, an image of the Chandrapuli, which is one of the oldest known Bengali available thing that you offer of quote unquote pure ingredients. When it's pure, difficult thanks to the Chaitanya obviously population, especially in the Hindus, they turn vegetarian food so they try to do their best to kind of cleanings and varieties of different sweets because since the milk in what we call chino or which means cut, it was made with that product would be of however, of my defense, that this kind of kinds of sweets that you would be getting very well in Nagarullah was Bhinchandra Nag, who is the maker of Shandesh. The various food, of course, I have another example is cut. It's my very the thing about is the Muslim impact. Bengal was invaded by many, many Muslim rulers at different points of time. And of course, from Bakhtiyar Khilji to Hussein Shah, nobody really left us alone for a long time. The last independent Nawab of Bengal was Shiraz-ud-Dowla, who was murdered on the Battle of Plassey with Lord Clive. Wajid Ali Shah settled in Yabruz. Most significant addition Muslims in to the Bengali cuisine plethora is definitely the biryani. Hands down, no doubt. Today, when you are ordering food from outside, the highest ordered food for Kolkata is actually the biryani. But apart from that, the handi kebabs, the nargisi kofta, the guli kebabs, the bhuna, the Husseini kariya kebab, and the assortment of meat items were actually much more it was actually attributed to the Muslims rather than the Hindus who were eating fishes mostly, and meat was actually considered to be only allowed during the pujo when there would be a sacrifice of some kind of animal, and then the meat would be considered to be holy and therefore eaten, or from sources which you would rather not mention because you probably got it on the slide, like you stole someone's goat and you cut it and eat it, or you took a pigeon and you ate it. So that's how it was. The biryani, of course, with the addition of potato, was created during the kitchens of the last Nawab, Wajid Ali Shah. But whether the Nawab had actually anything to do with the recipe itself is extremely, extremely doubtful. Probably Nawab ate and said, "Oh wow, this is great." But even then, I have heard from many people who were born during the Vishnu Pato was a sign that the person who was invited there because he wanted to see and they have wedding biryani. It is very apparent that they put in about 2:1 ratio of meat to rice, where it will take you some time to find the rice in between the very, very delicious chunks of meat. So during the 1970s and 80s, biryani sort of gained that footage of becoming a one product meal, one item meal, which would be economic for the single eater, which would be tasty, and which would have this comfort factor that I'm eating something from outside. So, all in all, the biryani sort of rose to prominence sort of during the 1990s when mainstream Kolkata came in touch with what it was, And it was only after the early 2000s when the biryani got one more addition, which was of the egg. Uh, and this was probably done by this amazing place called Arsalan, which first popularized the idea of adding this egg to the biryani. Shiraz, Armenia were not very fond of this particular addition. So you can see the Kolkata biryani photo, and then the other photo is of a bhuna. This is one of my favorite photos from one of my favorite bloggers, Food of Debjani, and the Kolkata biryani image is mine. Now, the second one, of course, is the British influence. And the first thing that I would have to say is that the British brought us tea. And the way we drink tea with milk and sugar is definitely a very British thing to do. But apart from the tea itself, British brought with it the idea of having an afternoon tea. And during the beginning of 1900s, a lot of small tea houses sort of cropped up all across Kolkata, where people would be serving tea with small things to eat. And this is where the little chop and cutlet culture started. There are definitely different kinds of cutlets and chops around Kolkata, which includes a lot of different things. We'll be talking about it later. The other significant British influence, which is a little bit of an accident, but quite like the Earl of Sandwich demanding something which he could eat with one hand, resulting in the invention of the sandwich. The invention of the roll was due to one British man who was going about his day and had come to Nizam's to get some kebab and porota, and all he wanted was for his hands to not get dirty. So he just said that, you know what, wrap up the kebab in a paratha and put the entire thing in a paper so that I can wipe my hands afterwards. So that's how the roll was born. So now the Kolkata style, quote unquote, kathi roll, which really now none of us say that in Kolkata, is something that kind of emerged from there. And you can see the different kinds of rolls here. Um, this is the fish fries, the cutlets, and again another favorite vlogger of mine, Bong Eats. The next one, of course, is the Portuguese influence. The Portuguese had brought us so many things from the New World, including the potato, the chilies, the tomatoes, and the jicama, which in Bengali we call shakalu. They also sort of popularized bread, and we call it the pau roti, which is coming from the Portuguese word for bread, which means pau. And of course, the Portuguese gave us the cheese, and they also popularized cottage cheese or chana, which today forms the base of many Bengali curries, as well as the base of most Norom Pak Sandesh, which is why we all are very grateful to the Portuguese. The next one is the impact of Rajasthan and Bihar. Now, these people sort of came mostly from those areas to kind of they were down in their luck and they came here to make their fortune. And they are incredibly hardy and incredibly dedicated people. And I am really a great admirer of these two communities for the sheer amount of hard work they can do. The Marwaris, most significantly, produced an assortment of farsan and different kinds of fried lentils, which what happened was we Bengalis kind of took over from there, and we started adding our own set of signature spices, which kind of gave rise to different chanachurs across Bengal. We call it chanachur, or dal, but it's actually the dal moot. And this chanachur that we eat, also the word chanachur sort of incurs from this term called chana zor garam, which is also a similar thing where you kind of carry these things in a small round bowl with a little insert inside, which is filled with hot coals so that the farsan that you're eating is very hot. So this is how it looks like. So this is, if you're looking at it, this is where the chana ghoti garam is made, where what you're doing is this is fresh farsan, which is then mixed with, this is some green cucumber, there is some chilies here, sometimes you have some coconut here, and this is mustard oil and some secret special spice mix. And you can see the coal insert here, which kind of keeps this very fresh. So as per your requirement, of course, here the one thing that's missing is something called the amra, or the this is difficult, but this is like a very sour vegetable slash fruit that we have here. And what all of this does is it kind of adds this sweet, salty, hot, crispy note to the chana. The other significant thing that the Biharis brought in, so this one was originally brought in by the Marwadis and then popularized by the Biharis and UPites. And this one is definitely brought from the UP region or, by the Bihari fuchka sellers, and that is the fuchka. And the way that we eat it is very different from the way, let's say, a Delhiite will eat it or a Mumbaikar will eat it. And we have our own blend. Mostly it is potato with a little bit of either mutter, which is like white peas, or uh, some kind of Bengal gram mixed together, and we add a secret spice mix which includes, but is not confined to, roasted dhania and jeera powder, which is what gives Kolkata fuchka that really beautiful smoky smell. And it's all served in this lovely crispy um, vessel which we call the fuchka shell. The next thing that we are going to talk about is the Chinese influence. Of course, Kolkata is the house to the largest Chinatown between here and London, and the Chinatown is divided into two parts. The first Chinese who came to Kolkata was this guy called Tong At Chew, and he established a sugar mill here but died shortly afterwards. After that, people started coming from China to India uh, during the middle of 1800s, and a strong line started coming in during the during the Boxer Rebellion, 1900, and shortly thereafter, especially from two different regions, which is Canton and Hakka. Now, the Cantonese people were shoemakers, carpenters, while the Hakka people were leather workers. So they had initially come here to set up these factories, but soon after they started serving their own style of food. At first, Kolkata wasn't really receptive to it, but when the Hakka people, the industrious Hakka people rather, I would say, understood that what Kolkata likes are food which is really spicy and really interesting and tangy, they started cooking it up. And that's how actually the dishes like chili chicken was born. And the Chinese chili sauce that we eat all over India was born right here in Kolkata by one industrious man who uh, owned what is very popularly known as the Pauchong brothers here in Kolkata, which is a very well-known shop of Kolkata. And of course, the Hakka style chow mein that you eat here is, of course, very, very Kolkata born. And the people from outside of Kolkata, rather India, would actually not know about the Hakka chow, etc. So you can see that this is one of the easy Chinese breakfasts that we have. This is the wonton noodle, and this one is a chili chicken. And the last part that I'm going to talk about is extension of the afternoon tea culture, which essentially is all about the cafe and cabins of Kolkata. So I have to say that the cabin culture of Kolkata evolved during the late 1800s and early 1900s, where young boys would find a place to go and stay and kind of have this conversation with their friends and eat something which would be otherwise forbidden in their houses. So naturally, this is also the place which became a hotbed for uh, some serious talks, which are definitely politically charged, as well as there would be little places where writers would just come over and have some tea and write, which is why and also this would be a spot where women accompanied by men would come in for some food. So that's why there would be little cabins all across these cafes where you could spend some time on your own, or you can spend some time alone. And that's why definitely different parts of Kolkata had these beautiful set of cafes and cabins. Dilkusha cabin being one of the most popular one, while Mitro Cafe being the other. And you can see one of the most famous thing that Mitro Cafe offers, which is a chicken Afghani cutlet, which is essentially a crumb fried cutlet topped with this gravy and served with some chilies. And in the last 30 years, we would have seen some major changes in Bengali food scene. There has been the addition of many new and interesting things that you can have. Definitely there is a lot of impact on world cuisine, and of course, things which have started adding to the menus include things from Italian, Tibetan, Mexican, as well as Japanese cultures. And what I have always liked about the Bengali food culture is the fact that Bengal has always been a great place where you can uh, kind of do your thing, and you can always be yourself, so as to say. And the best part is that that's why I feel that Bengal has so many different stories to tell. This is just an overview that I can give you. I hope you guys enjoyed this particular session with me, and I hope that you have enjoyed giving this listening to this presentation as much as I have the pleasure of giving it. Thank you so much. If you have any questions,
Uh,
let me know.
Thank you, Purna. It was a wonderful session and wonderful stories from Bengal. Uh, there are a